Welcome to NAT. My name is Paul Spanos, and today I have with me Harry Malos, who is a counselor and psychologist. And today's topic is about anxiety and fears, and that is quite common, isn't it?
Absolutely. Anxiety is a very, very common thing, Paul, and I'm glad you mentioned it, because we all at times feel anxious, and it is normal for us to feel anxious. It's not always a out of control disorder.
In your work environment, how big is that problem of anxiety and fears today?
Well, as I said, generally we are geared up in our structure to have anxiety. It is a warning that something may happen. We can talk about the fight or flight syndrome that some psychologists refer to. It's from prehistoric times when we either fight for our existence or run away from it. And that's what anxiety is. It's a warning that something's about to happen.
Am I right to say it is part of a sort of instinctive sort of reaction, isn't it?
It's exactly right to say it's an instinct, an inbuilt instinct.
Okay.
And it's like an alarm. It's warning you of something that may happen.
All right. And how can we understand? How I can understand anxiety in my own life, or fears, or phobias that become a problem?
Yeah. Well, it's true that generally anxiety is run or fueled by fear of something may happen, that catastrophizing something that may occur. It's always based on the truth about how we feel what may happen, or how we think of what may happen.
That means that this is connected to traumas in my society, in my previous experiences. Is it what causes it? It
can be through traumas, but it's not necessarily just through traumas. We can have a predisposition gene that causes us to be more susceptible to anxiety. It could be the way we've been brought up. It could be the environment we lived. It could be the way we think. It could be or a trauma that has caused us.
If it can be part of our gene, that means has really influence in our physical. Can influences me physically.
Yeah. Yes. There are three systems to anxiety. And one are bodily sensations. We can be anxious, and the signals are bodily signals, such as sweaty hands, a racy heartbeat, nausea, stomach churning. These are bodily symptoms. But they're not only just bodily symptoms, it could be behavioural symptoms as well. We're afraid to go out. We behave in a way that controls our life. We can't work, we can't socialise. So there are types of behaviour that are symptoms to anxiety. Or it could be a combination of cognition. We think that the worst thing will happen. It's all centred around how we think.
And how we think around our own fears.
That's right.
That means my own fears lead me to this behaviour, as you just mentioned, or bodily expression, and or thinking expression or something. Yeah,
all those things are systems of anxiety. So thinking, you have irrational thoughts, you catastrophize situation, you say, if I don't perform a particular duty, the worst thing will happen. If I don't wash my hands, which is very common to obsessive compulsive disorder, it's a form of anxiety. If I don't wash my hands 100 times, the worst thing will happen, or that I will get germs, or I will die, or something like that. So yeah, there are those three different systems. But generally, they're all fueled by fear.
All right. And fear, we're talking about any type of fear. Yeah, because in our society today, we hear a lot of abuse, for example. Abuse either from those who come as asylum seekers, for example, around the world. This is an international problem, this one. And a lot of them, they do suffer with the sort of depression and anxieties. That's part of it. We're talking about other fears from the social norm and or traumas, or could be a simple fear of the spiders or something.
That's right. That fears is what fuels anxiety. But there are different situations to the symptoms. For example, you mentioned trauma. Yes, we can be traumatized and have anxiety at later years. That started from that trauma. Or we can have genes that cause us to emotionally be more susceptible to not able to regulate our emotions. That's what anxiety does as well. We cannot regulate our emotions. We cannot balance them. So when we fear to the extreme for a long period of time. We can't bring it back down to a balance.
We're going to talk later on about the sort of some remedies, but at the moment you said in our genes, that means from without me having any inclination, but physically I can have the influence from my own genes.
Yes.
Having fears.
Or having anxieties.
Or anxieties.
Or being susceptible to anxiety.
That means that my own fears will lead me easier to be anxious.
Fears is generated or associated or collaborated with that if you don't do something, or if you do something, the worst will happen. We don't want to go out because we fear that a train will run us or a bus will hit us. So it is all fear-based, and if we avoid it, we get anxious when we have to do it, because we know that if we do that, something worse will happen.
Very quickly, can this one end up to depression?
Although I'm glad you said, because anxiety is different to depression. Anxiety, as I said, is always fuel-based and of what may happen. Whereas depression, you are already in there.
All right.
You're already in the place and you can't get out. That's a general view, difference or contrast to anxiety. But yes, for a prolonged period of anxiety can lead you to depression. Yes.
Thank you very much. We have touched upon the definition of anxiety and fears, and we're going to come back shortly with the impact of anxiety and fears in our lives. Welcome back. And today's topic is about anxiety and fears. We have discussed about the definition of those two, but what is the impact? With us today is Harry Malos, who is the counselor and psychologist. Now, we did discuss about the phobias and that they lead to our anxieties. Now, how severe is the impact in my life? Let's take in my social activities. And if I've got that.
Social anxiety, as you call it, has different impacts. The social anxiety is that you feel that you don't have the confidence to perform. So you lack confidence, and as you lack confidence, it actually builds more anxiety. So it's like a cycle. You don't have the confidence to socialize, to have a normal social activity, and that confidence leads to more anxiety. More anxiety leads to more lack of confidence. So you don't want to go out. You don't want to go to work because you think your performance will be tested and would be found short, or you don't have the skills to communicate, or you will fail at a particular discussion, or you.
Then I become a sort of antisocial and I isolate myself.
You isolate yourself. They are the behavioural to one of the systems of anxiety. Remember, there are the two, but behavioural symptoms are generally about the phobia of performing, or the phobia of fearing something will happen, or that you might get hurt, or that you might even die.
And then in that isolation, I suppose, can lead me to loneliness later on, isn't it?
That's a lot of people.
And that's another issue.
That's another issue, but a very, very relevant issue. Yes. That people who isolate themselves are very lonely people.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's definitely. And also, we mentioned about irrational thinking.
Yes.
That anxiety can lead me into irrational thinking.
That's right.
An example of that can it be, for example, I'm a student and I've got exams.
Yes.
And as you mentioned before, I catastrophize everything.
That's right.
How does this work?
Well, you may have an inclination that you think is a small issue, but because of your anxiety, it's built up from a small little issue to a mountain.
Okay.
And you build mountains over small issues.
That means I can be a good student, but the anxiety in itself will cause me to
feel like you're not a good student, or that you haven't...
I'm a failure or something.
That you're a failure, or that you are not good enough to sit in the exam, or that you haven't studied, or the exam's going to be too difficult, or it's going to be on covering other issues that you haven't studied. So you think the worst will happen.
Okay, that means...
That's why we get the word catastrophizing.
That means I really distort the truth of being a good student.
Spot on word. It's irrational thinking.
Okay.
Where we think the worst will happen. And generally speaking, the worst never happens. But that alone does not stop them feeling less anxious.
Then in this sort of example, I can be a parent, for example, and I have only negative things when my child goes out tonight, and I've got fears all the time that...
So your own anxiety can be transformed into another person by you always saying that the worst thing will happen, because that's how you feel.
Okay, that means I feel this way, and
therefore I'm warning you that this will happen to you.
Then in this case, my anxiety has an impact to the other person.
It's exactly
make their life miserable.
Yes,
next to me.
Yes,
that's
it's an interrelational thing. Yes, so it impacts other people in your family. Yeah.
Yeah. Then, is it a case that I can have anxiety because we have mentioned about the physical reaction as well, bodily reaction.
Yes.
That bodily reaction, is it always there, or I can have anxieties without that bodily reaction?
Look, it comes and goes. It's always there, but it comes and goes in spurts of whether you feel high or low. It's always there. But how do we measure? That's a good question. How do we measure that you are actually having bodily sensations that's the definition of anxiety? Well, when these bodily sensations stop you from being social, when they stop you from performing normal activity, when they stop you from sleeping, when they stop you from or make it difficult for you to go to work, these bodily sensations then are referred to as anxiety.
Okay. But the means can be isolated as bodily reaction, which is doesn't have to be the same time as the thinking, irrational thinking, and or behavior can be in isolation and all together.
Yes, you can have a combination of both. Or usually they're separated, but you can feel so nauseous. That's a bodily sensation of anxiety that you feel you're just going to vomit. And you cannot go out of the house because you're going to be sick.
What will be if there is something, a simple idea that can tell me that goes because of my anxiety rather than the other person or my environment?
Oh, so you're saying
how can identify?
How can you
see it in myself, the anxiety? Because sometimes I might have irrational thinking, but and I convince myself it is your fault, it's not mine. It's my environment's fault rather than my anxiety.
I think what you're trying to say is, as a very famous psychologist said, nothing is to be feared. It is only to be understood.
Okay.
So the more we understand what is happening to us, the better we develop our own skills to cope with it. Remember early on I said that anxiety is very general. It's very democratic. It happens to everybody. So we can't avoid it. So there's no cure, no pill. Here's this pill, it'll stop you from feeling anxious. Even if it is, it does other things. What we can do is learn how to cope with it.
That means, so far we said that anxiety is quite common.
Yes, it is very common.
It is quite common. Now, anxiety comes from fears.
Yes.
And then that has, of course, impact to those around me.
That's right.
And of course, into my own development or understanding.
That's right.
But you already touched the point of knowledge.
Yes.
And in the next segment, we're going to discuss some remedies or avenues, how we can cope better knowingly of my anxiety.
Okay. Sounds good.
Thank you for being with us. Please join us after the break. Welcome back. You're watching NAT, and the third part of our program today in the topic of fears and anxieties is remedies, coping mechanisms. With us, Harry Malos, Counselor and Psychologist. Harry, how can I face my own fears? Is there any mechanism that can help me to channel myself into remedy of my own anxieties?
Yeah. Well, facing your fears is an interesting topic. I think more than facing them, you need to equip yourself of being aware of what's going on, understanding. And understanding, if we're talking about anxiety, there are some myths associated with anxiety, very common myths. For example, people who are feeling anxious or have anxiety think that they're going crazy, they think that they're going to be institutionalized in a ward. You're not going crazy. You're not going to go into a ward, and you're definitely not insane because you're feeling crazy, because you're feeling anxious. Another thing is that, am I losing control? Am I losing control of my life? No, again, it's not that you're losing control. It's a warning signal that you fear something might happen. Remember the definition of what anxiety is about. Another thing is, am I having a heart attack? I'm about to die. You're not having a heart attack. You're not about to die. So understanding these things helps you along the way to cope with it.
That means that the correct question to myself would be to identify the way I act as an anxious person in my behavior and or in my bodily reaction, or my irrational thinking. As soon as I identify that, I try to talk about it and have more knowledge about it, isn't it?
That's right. Being aware of it, being aware that, okay, if you normally catastrophize a situation, you kind of bring doubt to the doubt itself. You say, well, hang on, is it really true? Is this what happened last time I was out? Did I get run over by a bus? Or what are the statistics of, putting awareness to why you're feeling that way can help you cope.
All right. And there is the truth about shall set you free is a written quote. And that will help me to, obviously, that knowledge will help me to open an avenue of escaping.
Yes, it does, because we become desensitized to the hold that anxiety has, or the fear that anxiety has. But so if you're afraid to go out, for example, to the milk bar, and you're afraid to go out, one of the first steps to desensitize is to go outside the front door. And nothing happened, then you come back in. The next step is you go a little further down the road, and slowly you become desensitized to your fears. That's another coping.
Is there any medical treatment to the physical anxieties, such as if I have perfuming, sweating or something, or my heart sort of begins to go all over the place?
Definitely there are, and we don't like to profess as counsellors that you should take medication unless it's totally uncontrollable. We like to think that a counselling session and awareness can actually bring you to coping or transform you to a better place. But yes, there are. Obviously, when you can take medication these days for anything, but that just stops the symptom. It doesn't address the cause.
Okay. talking about the different types of remedies here, that means the role of the counselor in this case is to help me to have more faith against my fear, isn't it?
More understanding that it's the fear that's holding you and gripping you with this fear of what might happen. Okay. And often when we face our fears, they lose the hold that they have on us. They don't have the same control over us. It's another way of coping by understanding. Because
I try to think, because we discuss about that my mind when it is full of anxieties will catastrophize everything. How I can reverse that? Yeah, sort of creating hope of something. Yes, and that means the counselors, from the counselor's point of view, I gain knowledge, isn't it? You gain awareness of what is happening to you, and why, and what type of fear creates that, and what type of fear creates it, and what kind of system it is that you're into, and together with a number of tools. One that's very common is we use this as term, as I said, desensitizing the client to actually accept that this is not as harmful as they thought it would be. Okay, and because there are people that have been through the trauma of wars, and they have come even to this country in Australia, and their experience is very traumatic experience. In those sort of extreme situations, how you can sort of try to bring them back into normal thinking without them fearing their next door neighbor? Yeah, well, you're talking about post-traumatic stress disorder, and that's another topic altogether, but very, very common. It's and that can give you panic attacks. It can they can come very quickly and go very quickly, or you are continuously, chronically traumatized all the time. It's not just anxiety, but it's also that you've been traumatized by something that you've seen, something that you've experienced, or something that you heard. And that causes you to shut down. Possibly it's another topic for the next time to talk about. And it's very in psychology, I think there's endless types of topics we can talk about and bring examples on. Is there anything else that you would like to conclude about the anxiety to the people who are watching us now, and how they could face it better? Yeah, well, first of all, I would like to leave them with this encouraging that anxiety was meant to be something of a warning for us in order to protect us. Remember that it was not there to be our enemy. However, when anxiety is fed too much, then it becomes an obstacle for us to live a normal life. That's the difference. And then what am I going to do when I identify that? Then you seek a counsellor. You try to understand what is happening to you, and don't keep it to yourself. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for being with us today, and we'll definitely talk again. Thank you for being with us. You have been watching NAT. See you next week.